We welcome you here to the 6th edition of the Festival Aus der Nacht heraus, the political film festival. Thank you all for being here. Firstly, I would like to introduce our solidarity group, Auswärts. We are all immigrants from Greece who came to Germany for studies, for work, for a better living. Facing new challenges as migrants here in Germany, such as the language barriers, finding a new job or studies, the isolation, the racism, the bureaucracy, that all led us to establish the solidarity group Auswärts. And our goal was and still is to support the reception and self-organization of newcomers. 6 years ago, we launched this film festival as part of our Solidarity project. Since 2017, our festival has addressed pressing socio-political issues through film screenings and panel discussions. This year, we focus on 4 critical subjects that highlight the current state of our society. The previous 2 days, we talked about climate crisis, inequality, and migration. Then the far right as the new normal, experiences and strategies of resistance in Europe. And tomorrow, for the last day of our festival, we will speak about the topic political drag from a queer feminist perspective. Today's discussion topic, as you know, is censorship and disinformation in media, the case of Palestine. And I give the microphone to Ioana.
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here despite the weather conditions. So I will start first by presenting the members of the panel, our guests, from left to right. So I'll start with Ido Arad, who is German-based Israeli musician and conductor, and he has been living in Germany since 2003. Next is Labrini Thoma, who is a journalist with 40 years of experience, 30 of which covering international news, sometimes as on-the-spot correspondent. Major achievement of her life is being fired twice for defending the freedom of the press. Next is Yasmin Daher. Yasmin is a Palestinian writer and academic. She holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Montreal, Canada, with specialization in political philosophy and ethics. She has worked as a lecturer and researcher in Bayezid University in Palestine and Concordia University in Canada. She is actively involved in various political and feminist movements. She currently serves as a director of Febrayer Network, a Berlin-based network for independent media organizations in the Arab world. And last but not least, Nadia Samour, who works as a criminal defense lawyer with a focus on political criminal proceedings and international criminal law. She previously studied at the Humboldt University in Berlin and at the Irish Centre for Human Rights in Galway. She lectured criminal law at the Humboldt University and published academic pieces on how the German judiciary dealt with BDS-related cases, on apartheid in Israel, and on the Nakba demonstration bans in Berlin. Nadia co-initiated the ad hoc lawyers group in Berlin following the massive repression of pro-Palestine protests after October 2023. She has been involved in the Palestinian community in Berlin and Germany for over 20 years. Anti-racism and anti-colonialism, criticism of the police and prisons, and the cross-community struggle for liberation play a central role in her political practice. Thank you for being here. It's a great honor. So to kick off the discussion, I would like to start with the observation that after October the 7th, the criminalization of any act of solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian people has been intensified. Since that day, not that previously the case was much different, but since that day, the mainstream media and other political establishments employ even more extensively their mechanisms of censorship, disinformation, and propaganda in their attempt to shut down any voices that oppose to this ongoing war. And when these voices are heard in the end and denounce the war and the ethnic cleansing, very often are labeled as and accused of being anti-Semitic. Now, to put things into a better perspective, in the meantime, the rise of far-right and real neo-Nazism in Germany, but also in Europe and beyond, has become very dangerous. The situation in Gaza and in Rafah becomes worse and worse, and to our great disappointment, the so-called independent media and leftist Western media refuse to take a clear position on the topic, and at the best of the cases, remain just silent. We believe that we are living in a democratic country, that we want to unite with the pro-Palestine movement, we want to raise our voices against this war, or to scream to stop this genocide. We also suffer the consequences of this propaganda, and we are feeling repressed in conversations at the level of the neighborhood and on the streets when we go and protest. We feel that we're just left with the alternative to be spectators of the genocide just by looking at the news feed of our social media. Today's panel, that consists of activists, media representatives and journalists from Palestine, Israel, Germany, Greece, and the Arabic world, will help us get a more clear picture of how media work on these parts of the world. They will share their opinions and their experiences.
Okay, good evening. Is it too loud? I feel it is. No, it's good? Okay. Type. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight, and thank you so much for organizing and hosting and throwing this wonderful festival. So I think what I would like to do in the 10-12 minutes that I'm asked to open this panel kindly, I would like to walk us a little bit into going to Gaza and looking at the situation of journalists there, and then from there actually looking on the bigger picture, taking the bird perspective, as they say, looking at Western international media, and then going and looking at or coming back locally to where we are, to the German media and their role, and then talking maybe a little bit, if we have time, about the German institutions and their role, the role they play in depicting this specific picture about the situation in Palestine. So as we speak, I looked before the panel at the latest reports released by the UN, and according to the UN, as the beginning of this month, more than 122 journalists and media professionals have been killed in Gaza, and many, many more have been injured. This, according to this report and other reports, like the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, they say has become the deadliest and the most dangerous conflict for journalists in the recent history. Dozens of Palestinian journalists have been detained by Israeli forces in Gaza and also in the West Bank. That is, probably you have been following the news and seeing that while Gaza is being bombarded and there's a genocide that's actually taking place for the 9 months, the situation in the West Bank has deteriorated and intensified quickly. So their harassment, intimidation, and attacks on journalists are taking place. So to understand actually the magnitude of the horror of the Gazan journalists, we are talking about those who, if they have endured and lived until now, after these 9 months, they are covering the war after they have lost families, homes, relatives, and they have been stranded like many times already. And but still, they are on the ground doing great job, great work, fulfilling their duty. However, the international media or the media community worldwide is not and has not been fulfilling their duty, unfortunately. First of all, the Gazan journalists. So far, not enough noise, not enough attention, not enough has been done by that community in order to elevate the voices and the suffering of their colleagues, people who work in their profession. They have not been actively in solidarity with them and pressuring, for instance, one thing they could do is pressuring their governments to be allowed into Gaza. Yeah? So people should really be asking today, after 9 months, why international journalists, why international media is not yet in Gaza and is not yet covering what's happening in Gaza on the ground, and why this toll has been left only on Gazan journalists who are documenting basically their own death and the death of their own people. So there isn't enough pressure to go and cover fully and what's happening on the ground. Now, if we move from this point to talk about Western media, and I don't want to be redundant. I guess most of us know probably what I am going to say. But Western media, since day one of the war, had adopted the Israeli propaganda, and has been repeating unverified facts and becoming really the washing machine of the war, of the genocide, both in terms of the language, the terminology they apply, the way they shape and presented everything that is happening. They used language like clashes instead of attacks. They don't use the word children when they describe Palestinian children. They use, for instance, minors, sometimes even adults, and I'm going to give an example. They don't actively accuse Israel when the attacks happen, so they rather use passive language, as if death just befalls the Palestinian walking from home to work or something like that. So a recent example, I looked it up, coming from, for instance, American Sky News, reporting the killing of a Palestinian child by Israeli forces in early January. And I'm quoting, it's a child who died by a bullet. So, quote, the bullet accidentally straying in the back of a van and killing a 3-4-year-old young lady. So the bullet just strayed in the back of a van and the child found herself in the van. So this is just one example and really a glimpse of 5 minutes if you spend on international media, and all of them are implicated. BBC, CNN, Sky News, all of them, all over the world in this depiction. And also European media like Italian, French. Maybe sometimes we talk about them less, but they are also part of how the Palestinian has been portrayed as responsible for their own death and passively dying, etc. And so repeatedly, the coverage reduces the Palestinians and their stories to numbers and statistics, and in an overall continued dehumanizing effort, which did not, of course, start in this war and has a wider and larger impact. In 1921, very long time ago, during the First World War, the French historian Marc Bloch wrote, "A false news item is always born from collective representations that predate its birth." So it's way before its birth. It's never on the moment that now you are going to come up with how you want to represent or present the Palestinian. The representation is already in the drawer, is already in practice. You just use it again and again. And the false news is the mirror where the collective consciousness contemplates its own features. So lies actually spread not because there is a lack of evidence or there is a lack of pictures and knowledge. I mean, as we understand, if anyone who's really interested would just open any social media account of any Gazan on the ground, you could see for yourself the truth of what's happening. They are out there, they are available and for free. But lies actually spread because those who tell them have the power to be believed. They have the power materially because, for instance, they own these channels, they own the means of communication, they own more powerful countries and armies, etc. Or it's power that can be related to the hegemonic power, like what kind of culture you're disseminating around the world, how you are speaking to the audience, what kind of civilization you speak on behalf also. So I am saying this because many times we talk about ethics of journalism, which is definitely not being respected, but the problem is beyond that. It's not only the ethics of journalism, there is something structural in the way that the media is structured. You can call it racism, one way to call it. Maybe we can discuss this later, what really terminology we want to use. But there is something here that's beyond just the language and beyond the ethics that are not respected. I'm still on time. Okay. So German media is no different, except that it's worse. And much worse. They just do it for free, for like no reason, just for fun. There is the cases of propaganda really in German media, propaganda driven by racist media outlets that for them every pro-Palestinian action and speech is anti-Semitic. They incite for hatred. They dox activists. They work as undercover informants for the police or for the state, and they are doing really a great disservice for anything that is called journalism or comes close to journalism. But that's like one, Springer and its offsprings. But there is also the other kind of like more so-called respected institutions. Where there is formal censorship, there is clear censorship, and I'm going to give an example, for these media outlets. And on top of that, then the journalists themselves adopt this censorship, and then they apply self-censorship, their own produced format of understanding how the rules in this country or in this society work, and how I want to be like more religious than the Pope, or whatever it's the saying was. So we all, maybe if you remember, the Deutsche Welle published an infamous report. It was not really published. It was sent to its employees internally, secretly in 2021, so 3 years ago. And in it, they decided how they are telling their employees and reporters how to cover and not cover Israel-Palestine. And just an example, they are telling the reporters not to use the terminology apartheid or apartheid regime when covering Israel. It is not allowed. And never to use the terminology of colonial. They claim that a criticism that tarnishes the state of Israel is one and the same as a criticism against the Jewish people. Now, this is something I think we will go into, but I need to stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I should just start, yeah? When I spoke with Joanna and Dimitris, they told me the theme is censorship of media. I thought maybe it would be interesting if I could say some words about my own country, the state of Israel. So if it's okay for you, before I come to the media, I just want to do a small introduction, what I think it actually means. When we speak about censorship in general, it's actually a sort of repression. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is it actually that is being repressed? And in the case of Israel, I think it's quite clear. We have to think about the main idea behind this country, which is actually, as we all know today, Zionism. Zionism as a state for the Jews, which, as we know, already in 48, but much before, actually, the 50 years before it, actually meant the appropriation and the stealing of the land and exploitation of the Palestinians from their own land. So I think the original sort of repression in Israel, any sort of repression, actually has to do with anyone who's casting doubt, or with the idea of casting doubt of Zionism being an acceptable idea as it is. And after we agreed on that repression is a repression of anti-Zionism in a sense, then the next question I would like to ask is, who is exactly the victim of this repression in Israel? I would say there are in general three main groups, two extremely small one and one huge one. No, I'm sorry, one very big, one huge one very small, and one very big. Correct myself. The first group, which is very big, 21% of the population in Israel, is what is called in Israel the Israeli Arabs. They are the ones suffering mostly, especially since the 7th of October, but since always actually, under the state repression, under media repression, repression of every sort. We speak about 2 million people in a land of 10 million. And the way that repression went against them since the 7th of October was absolute state violence. We have to say that. There's no better way to say it. If you wrote something in Twitter, police will come to your house, professors got fired. And this was hardly mentioned until, except from very few cases in the Israel media as it is. There was a professor in Jerusalem, which the case got a little bit more attention, but many people got arrested. Many students were either expelled or were under unbelievable pressure not to say their opinions. So this is the first big group. The second very small group is what is called, could be defined as the Israeli left. I wouldn't even want to say a percent because I'm not sure it is one. But some of them actually, bravely enough, went to try and demonstrate against what is happening since the 7th of October in Gaza. I don't speak about the demonstrations which the Israeli media cover all the time concerning the anti-Netanyahu government and free the hostages. That's a completely different thing. So this very small group also exists, and it also suffers from very hard police violence and repression, which is actually, even if they had some chance to say something, it's not really being known to most of the population because the media doesn't actually almost hardly any say something about it. And then the last huge group is the conglomerate of most of the Israeli Jews who live there, and we speak about 7 million people. And this, I would like to argue, is a group which actually doesn't even need an active sort of repression, as I would like to call it, in contrast to the other two, which means that police really comes, or the legal sort of repression. This group doesn't really need this repression because they're already online with the idea of Zionism itself, and now it is then being expressed through the media and through the intellectual life in Israel. Now, I hope that was clear, these three groups, and then I think maybe it will help to do a small survey of how Israeli media actually looks like. Now, it's also important, before I say that Israel is trying to, or let's say in the social conscious, in the conscious of the people who live there now, in the collective conscious, as you said, there is kind of a try to present the 7th of October as the first day of history. You know, this has obviously placed to the hand of the Israeli government when they try to do propaganda for outside reasons, but it is actually the case that collectively the Jewish Israeli conscious in Israel is now really is into this idea that something so qualitatively crazy happened, so special, that a new history has begun. I'm saying that because, in my eyes, the unbelievable, ugly side which Israeli media has shown since the 7th of October is only a continuation of something which existed there from beginning on. It only has an uglier face, but the essence of it is not to look at the very simple reality that we are responsible for a crime against the Palestinians. The collective consciousness of the Israelis is, as I said, almost all of them is just not accepting that and is doing everything it's actually subconsciously can to try and suppress that feeling. So in that sense, they're very hard to repress, so to say. You know, they only need the media to tell them what they already want to believe. And it goes so far as even if the media will show some pictures, you know, there are two, obviously, very different ways of looking at the same pictures and telling yourself a different story. The role of the media in Israel is actually only to tell, so to say, the right story. And the huge part of the population is willing to hear that. Now, I'll just do a small survey, if I may, of how does it actually look. We have one newspaper in Israel. I speak about newspapers there after I will say some words about television. We have newspaper, maybe you heard it, it's Haaretz. It's what is being called the left Israeli newspaper. One has to admit it also has a completely different standards and quality of newsmaking than the rest of the newspapers in Israel. So they consider themselves the Israel New York Times. I don't know if that's a compliment, but whatever. They actually do give stage to real left journalists. I'm sure you heard the name Gideon Levy, and you saw him speak in Al Jazeera, Amir Haas, and also more than, not many, but 2-3 prominent Arab journalists or writers do get to write things which I would say that help the intelligentsia strata in Israel while they're reading this newspaper, telling themselves, we do live in a democracy. Because if I let Gideon Levy for 30 years now telling me what's happening in Palestinian territories and what the Israelis is doing, so it's not like I live in a dictator and nobody's allowed to hear it. And Haaretz has this very interesting role, because at its core, it's absolutely liberal, also economically liberal, if not neoliberal. It has a very liberal policy. And at the end, when you really look at the front of the newspaper, or what is really being produced at the core, now it's more obvious than always since the 7th of October, because we are, as the Israelis call it, a war. The biggest part of the newspaper will be used by the army correspondents and kind of I would say, how do you say, trocken, just a objective way of describing the war, which if you really look into it is not really objective. And I would like to give one example, just that you understand in what kind of atmosphere the media works now in Israel. Haaretz, since 7th of October, was actually almost on a daily basis counting or reporting the deaths in Gaza. Now, we know, I think everybody, there are two different ways of counting it, but in general, they use the official count, which we also see here. And the first few weeks, they were actually saying the deaths in Gaza reported by the health ministry is this and this. After a few weeks, suddenly the formulation changed to according to the health ministry of the Hamas. This was a big change because, I don't know if somebody told Haaretz to do that. I don't think it did. I think they just felt where the wind was blowing, and since then, even Haaretz readers, read this number and it says the health ministry of Hamas. It looks like some, a very, how should I put it? It's a suspicious number because Hamas is all over it. So this is the alibi newspaper of the Israeli left, in a sense. The rest of the newspapers and all the television channels are in complete agreement with the Israeli politics during this war. We also have a really right-wing Israeli channel which is doing propaganda, which I can only compare with the worst times in the worst wars we know from the 20th century. But also in the, so to say, normal channels, which is channel 12, 13, and 11, the level of racism, the crazy ideas which are being spoken as if it was completely normal, not giving food to 2.3 million people, to put them under pressure so they will release the hostages, for example, or finishing Hamas until the last person, or every child is guilty because Hamas is guilty because he's shooting next to the children. A complete loss of standards, of any really human standards, which you would think democracy, as Israel calls itself, would normally have. But still, I think most important point is that when we look at it, also when we look at the German media, what is happening now, it's like an acceleration of, it's like they're on steroids. But like I mentioned before, the idea is the same. In that sense, nothing really changed. It's only as if, it was raining and the sewage came out. But yeah, I have to say it like that because it's very difficult to look at it. It's people and the media represents one-to-one the voices in society, the voices of my friends and some of the people also in my family, I have to say, unfortunately. I just have one more sentence and then I'm finished. So maybe the most important point I want to make is that a crisis like now, this horrible crime that is being done in Gaza, is a chance for us to see what is really behind the so-called democratic capitalistic structure we live in. Israel is trying to make out of it exactly the opposite. Hamas is being they speak about it as if they're Nazis, as if they're ISIS, as if whatever, and we're supposed to forget about the occupation. But the wrongdoing, the original sin, is the occupation. The Israeli media is just helping the Israelis not to think about it. They just give them diversion. I think that's enough for now.
Tell me, because I can talk for hours. So, thank you first of all for having me here. I'm honored, and it's wonderful because as a journalist, the only thing I can do is write and talk, and you give me the chance to talk about Palestine. It's something that we should not stop doing as much as we can. But I want to start because we're in Berlin, one of the theaters of the Cold War, the first Cold War, of the difference of that Cold War and the Cold War under which we live now. In the former Cold War, journalism was existing. We had wonderful journalists doing their job, from Vietnam to the Cold War to showing all the bad things happening, really covering what was going on. Also, we didn't cancel people. I remember as a kid with the right government in Greece, right-wing government, that the Soviet chess masters arrived in Athens. It was an honor for us to have them there. They were some of the greatest chess players in the world. Nobody said they're Russian, they're Soviet, they are not allowed to come here. So now we're under the cancel culture Cold War. They decide what we should hear, who we should hear, how we should learn. We're under 1984 was a nice scenario, really. The things are very bad. Even people like Gideon Levy, our colleague from Haaretz, who continues to talk, have to send their families outside of Israel. His family is not in Israel. They stop in the street and spit him. Ofer Kassif, who is a communist MP in Israel, and I'm proud to say he's a friend, has to do the same, send his family out. So Israeli journalists and Israeli leftists who are having a voice are people who should take care of their families. The Dagdou family, to talk about the journalist in Gaza, he had to see the head of the Al Jazeera office in Gaza. He had to see 2 of his children, his grandchild, his wife dying, and then the Union of Journalists of Egypt took over the rest of his family because he was sure that they will be killed too. So there were journalists taking care, Arab journalists taking care. In the same time, the Greek Union of Journalists, the German Union of Journalists, the French Union of Journalists didn't say nothing. The number is more than 125. We believe it's 154. Our cameraman and journalists who died. And this is the number in Gaza. Because we have people like an Iranian journalist who died in South Lebanon, who were killed in South Lebanon. We're not only working in Gaza. Now, if you want to go in Gaza to work, you cannot. Israel decides who gets in. That's why most of them are people sacrificing their lives for their people. They're the most honorable team of journalists you can find right now in this world. Now, the other thing that's missing, as it seems, journalism is the first one, is diplomacy. In the first Cold War, we had diplomacy. There was the famous red telephone between Moscow and the White House. They could call each other if something was going bad, like the Gulf of Pigs when we were really near to nuclear war in Cuba. But they were talking. Now they're not talking. There's no diplomacy. There's not an open way to talk under the table. A way to realize that we have to keep away the war. And we can do that through diplomacy. So from Ukraine to Palestine, diplomacy is not there right now. When the UN tries to put diplomacy on the table, especially with Palestine, the UN becomes anti-Semitic. You heard that, right? The UN is anti-Semitic, UNRWA is anti-Semitic, everybody in the world is anti-Semitic. So that's what's happening. Everybody who says anything bad about Israel or Netanyahu is anti-Semitic. Now, I know Bibi for a long time. I can call him, we're in a first name basis. It was my password in my computer back in 1997. So I know him well. And he's a butcher. And he's an opportunist. And he's one of the worst people maybe walking on this earth right now. But he's not alone. And the Israeli society is passing the line to fascism. That is what's happening. And how do we cover it? We have a new Netanyahu government with Ben Gvir in it. You know Ben Gvir? The guy, yeah, a very nice guy, very nice guy. Yeah, he says that you should kill Palestinians as you kill mosquitoes. It's one of his phrases that he loves to say. He said that he has to have his own force, his own police to be member of that government. It was accepted. It's a police by the colonialists that he created. When this government came in Israel, was formed in Israel, we had an article about it and about the extreme right turn in the Press Project of Israel. I wrote it myself, to be honest. So, because, you know, Bibi and me, we have this relationship. What happened is there was not even one other newspaper, radio, television station to say in Greece that this is a far-right government, that this government has in it racists and fascists. It was just a Netanyahu government. All that went under that, all the power going to the far-right hands, we're talking about far-right in Europe, what's happening right now in Israel? Who are those people that commit the genocide? Was nowhere. Why? Because Greece is an ally of Israel. Why? Because our media are the media the government wants. They say the same story, the story that the government wants. Although our media is like the German media. We don't have the other laws that you're not allowed to say this word or do that, or you can be thrown out of the university. We don't have that. But the media are exactly like the German media in Greece, not the independent left media. Our people, though, is pro-Palestinian. 60% of the people of Greece are right now pro-Palestinian. 20 years ago, it was 80%. They're dying, some of them, you know. And also about 60%, 62, I think, percent is anti-NATO. And we're, of course, a member of NATO, a happy one, to help with everything they want. While the genocide is happening, why the media must be controlled like that? Because the Greek government is helping Israel. We had an exercise of the Air Force of Israel and Greece 3 weeks ago. They work together. The government is implicit in the crimes, the Greek government, because the Greek government is the bridge between NATO and Israel. That's the role we have right now. So Greece is a country that faces a lot of problems with its press. Actually, until last year, we were 107th in the World Index of Freedom of the Press. We were the last in the European Union. We're 88 now. So all the media in Greece follow the story and say the same story. All the journalists who are foreigners and go, not Palestinians, and go to Israel, like the Greek ones, are in Israel and are actually embedded journalists. So they say what Israel wants them to say. all the international news, most of them, are translations from American or Israeli English edition newspapers. And sometimes Google translated and not just even touched, just make it a little bit yours, just lie to me, but respect me too. They don't respect you. So we have right now a problem in Greece, and we have right now a problem in Europe, which is that this Cold War is a Cold War that doesn't allow us to learn what's really happening. We have to discover it, we have to show it, and we know that we're in danger. Small or big, depends. But there's a lot of journalists who have, like the Greeks know Aris Hadjistefanou. He is a great colleague, and he is pro-Palestinian. His life is threatened. They write to him awful things. I don't give a damn on my own. It's mostly sexist what they say to me, but to him it's death threats. So we have to face that too, and we have to face that everywhere, but in a very few European countries. Ireland was referred to. They can write the right stuff, because they were not a colonial power. They were a country that lived under colonial power, and thank God they don't forget. They're here. So this is the two things that how the Greek press is and why, and how we see with the Western eyes anymore what's happening in Gaza. In Palestine, the West Bank has a lot of problems right now, and forget about it, but I think they arrested about 10,000 people from the West Bank. Am I talking too much? 2 minutes, okay. What I wanted to say is that there's a press that writes the truth, and that's the press of the Global South. I belong to those crazy people who start their day with Telesur. So, I start there. So they say occupied Gaza. They say colonialism. They say apartheid. They say crimes against humanity. If you go to the media of the Global South, and that's what's expressed through South Africa's ICJ case, is that they remember, they don't forget, they know very well what's happening, and even though the elite has the power there, the channels, the newspapers, it's the elite of those countries that have it in their hands. Still, they remember and they know that they have to keep truth, to be truthful with their people. What we saw with Palestine, in not only in the Muslim countries like Indonesia, where nobody showed it in the West, what's going on there, how millions of people are in the streets. We saw also in Africa, we saw in Latin America. And the press there is real press. They're not embedded journalists. They're not doing what the boss says, especially in the Palestine question.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to share with you how the cases, how the defamation, censorship cases. I feel like this isn't going well. I don't know. Maybe we should. Yeah. Thank you. How they actually make a difference in people's lives from a legal perspective. Yes, when we speak about that, like media discourse here in Germany, especially, we need to speak about racism. We need to speak about law and order being pushed in media. We need to speak about horrible like depictions of Palestinians and those in solidarity with Palestinians. But we also have to speak about, and this is my job today, about how this really plays out, how this materializes in legal cases against activists, organizers, and community members. And I will start with a confession. I don't watch German news. I have no idea. Ever since I read about so-called Agro-Araber, like this was one of the titles in Focus describing the demonstrations here in Berlin, or ever since like aggressive Arabs, like this was the title. We need to choose, the title was, we need to make a decision. Do we want the Agro-Araber or do we want the Jews? And this was one of the titles. The other title that really put me off with German media was The Barbarians Are Among Us. And then you also had like a picture of one of the demonstrations. So I don't know what's being reported. I don't have the mental strength to go through this. Anyways, I see all these awful newspaper articles in the court files. They land in the court files of the cases that I work on. I will give you a couple of examples. And these examples are examples that predate October, not only because courts work very slowly and the cases that happen now will land on my table next year, but also to underline that what we are seeing now is not new. It's it's a development that we have been seeing. It's intensifying now. That is true, but we know this. We've seen this before. And so one of the cases really where you could see that how media and police or other authorities like the immigration authority and other repressive authorities work together is the case of Rasmiyya Aoudeh. Rasmiyya Aoudeh is a Palestinian, an older Palestinian organizer, feminist organizer. Perhaps some of you have heard of her case when she was deported from the US. She was deported to Jordan, and then based on terror charges, accusing her of participating in a terrorist attack 50 years ago. And, she came to Germany to give a speech here on the occasion of 8th of March, the International Women's Day. And even before her arrival, German media started to report about her as a terrorist. A terrorist is coming to Berlin. Berlin is giving a stage to a terrorist. The action she was accused of happened in 1969. It was a bombing of a supermarket in Jerusalem. 2 people died there. What hasn't been reported is that in the course of this action, hundreds of people, hundreds of Palestinians were arrested and tortured to give a confession. And she was one of those people being tortured and gave a confession. She withdrew this confession later, but that didn't help her. She was convicted and she served in a prison. And she was released 10 years later in a prison exchange. Now, Rasmiyya came to Germany, and minutes before the event started, she was arrested by the police, and she was handed a ban on political activities. And she was not able to speak at that event. She was not able to speak at any event at all or give any other form of political expression. And her visa was revoked. 4 years later, we won the case. Everything the police and the immigration authorities did was unlawful. But no one really cares. 4 years later, right? Like the media that wrote about her back then didn't pick up the case. Who cares? And the file of the immigration authorities, the authority that was the responsible one for this repressive action, contained no investigations on their own behalf, but only newspaper articles, the smearing newspaper articles about her. She was not heard. She was not asked for her opinion. She had no chance to defend herself. Only 4 years later, we won the case at the administrative court in Berlin. So here you see one of those cases where these newspaper articles that we talk about, that we find so racist, that we find so, defamatory, and that really are the result of censorship, because we don't see any counter representation or any kind of actual investigation. This becomes the basis. This really serves as the basis of state repression. They take these articles and make them their own knowledge and present them to the court. Another example I would like to give you, which is also an older case, it is happened in 2016. The Jewish Voice for Peace here in Berlin, or in Germany, had a bank account. And because the Jewish Voice decided to do what is ethically right, namely to support the BDS campaign in support of the Palestinian struggle, some journalist decided to make his own news. A journalist, well, maybe we could call him also an activist, because I'm not sure about his journalistic standards, but he himself decided to call the bank and present them with the fact that the Jewish Voice for Peace is supporting BDS, and BDS, has allegedly some connections to organizations that are on some terror list somewhere in the US. The bank, of course, did not bother to really do their own investigation, but they were pressured by this journalist, who then the next day published a piece in the Jerusalem Post about this bank offering bank account to this terror-supporting organization, namely the Jewish Voice for Peace. Following this article, the bank decided to terminate the bank account of a Jewish organization in Germany. And I believe the last time this happened, many other awful things happened to Jewish people here in Germany. So here again, a case, basically news being produced by the journalists themselves to then basically incite and make their very own news about their very own actions they have decided to do. And the Jewish Voice back then decided not to go against this bank account closure, but it happened again this year. I believe you've heard about it. This year they won. This year they decided to go against the closure of their bank account, and they actually won this case. And this year, what happened, bravo to my colleague, Ahmed Abed. He was the one representing the Jewish Voice. And this year, this whole termination of the bank account happened in the context of another case that I would like to talk to you about, namely the case of the Palestine Congress. I'm sure you've all heard about this Congress that was eventually banned on the spot. And I believe that, and on this bank account of the Jewish Voice, the donations were collected for this Palestine Congress. And so what happened with this Congress, again, it's the same pattern, really. It's the newspaper or certain journalists report about this Palestine Congress as a Congress of terrorists, as a Congress of Jew haters, as a Congress of terror supporters, you name it. And then they ask for a comment from some kind of racist politician. And this racist politician then uses this platform to say, oh my God, this is a terror congress, cannot happen in Berlin, this is outrageous, needs to be banned. Now this idea is being put out with the help of this newspaper, and in fact, it has been banned. Like, there is a very unfortunate collaboration between media and the state or other repressive authorities. And I think what I would like to discuss, perhaps, if you like, is the question: who serves whom? There's definitely a very close relationship, but who serves whom? Do the media serve the politicians by giving them the platform to distribute their racist ideas, or do actually what also happens, politicians or also police establish connections with media to then make popular a certain position in order to have the backing to actually do repressive measures such as banning, deporting, beating up, all the police violence that has been absolutely normalized, for example. There's like an entire backing for all of these actions in the ruling class. Actually, one last case. Actually, I have two more cases, but I don't want to take too much time. But I think one last case that also refers to the situation in Gaza, that we won eventually, is the case of Ghassan Abu Sitte. Ghassan Abu Sitte is a doctor who worked in Gaza, and he was planning to come to Berlin for this Palestine Congress. He was banned. He was not allowed to speak, and he was also banned from entering the Schengen entirely. So when he went to the Netherlands, he wasn't able to enter, and he didn't even know about this. But the Germans had put him on a list of an entry ban list. We went against this ban, and we won. And we didn't win because we're such excellent lawyers, but we won because the state authorities, they didn't even bother to really build a case about him. There was no case. All they did is to sabotage the Palestine Congress, and by banning Varoufakis and Ghassan Abu Sitte, and other people were also banned from entering and from speaking, even from being near the Congress. People were really banned from coming close to the air. So there was just this sabotaging of the Palestine Congress. And in his case, we actually won because there was no case. And the case they tried to build was Ghassan Abu Sitte being in Gaza as a doctor and participating in a so-called Hamas press conference. Now, you guess what this press conference is. It was the bombing and the killing of hundreds of people in the Shifa hospital, and he was reporting on that horrible massacre. And it has been depicted, as you said, the Hamas health ministry, it was a Hamas press conference, because anything that happens in Gaza, of course, is connected to Hamas. So this is what the German media wrote about him, and this has been copied into the case files, and they tried to ban him because he's a Hamas propagandist, basically. This is the sign to stop. I will leave the last case for later, perhaps. But thank you very much for listening.
Okay, I don't know if you want to continue. I mean, I was planning, maybe we can have another round, and maybe you can just comment on.
Do you mind if I add something? Can I add?
Please go on.
Is it okay?
Another round for everyone if they want to add
the same problem is in some of the Arab countries. We have to talk about it because the Arab governments are traitors of the Palestinian cause, and they're not only traitors, all the people under them are pro-Palestinian. In Greece we're 60%, but they're feeling the thing more than everybody. Now in Jordan, we have one one colleague who is in prison under the cybercrime law for the article, "The Role of Jordan in the Massacre." Because Jordan is helping Israel. Jordan is a buffer state. So because Jordan is helping Israel, a journalist, Heba Abu Taha, we have to say the names, wrote about it. 1 year in prison. Right now, she is in prison. She's of Palestinian origin, but she's a Jordanian journalist. So we have the same problem not only in Europe of suppressing the press, but we have it with prison in Arab countries too. We had the changes in the television of Italy too, where they decided that certain words should not be related with the the Israel-Hamas war. I'm sorry, that's the Israel-Hamas war. I think that you all saw the letter that the New York Times sent to everybody in the New York Times. The New York Times who had the false story about rapes. And now the UN, 3 days ago, gets out and say that they're raping the Palestinian women, the Israeli army, and nobody talks about it. And it's the UN, the United Nations talk about it.
But the anti-Semitic.
Oh, the anti-Semitic UN, you're right. Yeah, there. So, the Hannibal Directive, I think you all know what it is. We're sure now that they did that they killed some of their own people because they don't want people, Israeli people, in the hands of the Palestinians for the exchange and stuff. Nobody talks about it. Worst case was in New York Times again, and this is the last thing I'll say, and it shows what goes on in the United States too, with a journalist from The Intercept who, when he was a freelancer before The Intercept, gave some stories to Press TV. Press TV is Iranian. So, they discovered, the New York Times, that this is the relationship of Iran and the terrorists that work with Iran, like the Shiite militias and everything, with Intercept. They had a whole page, an article about that. Now, the day that two of our colleagues from Al-Mayadeen were killed, Al-Mayadeen called me and asked me to talk to them about how I see it, and I did it. I don't know if this means that I'm, I don't know, the hand of Nasrallah in Greece or something. I don't know. But that's our job. Our job becomes a crime. We're losing journalism everywhere, and we have to fight for it. It's your right to know what's happening. We have to fight for it, and we have to ask for it.
The level of defamation, the level of repression, which the media, actually the state, but with unbelievable help of the media in this country against the Palestinians, who goes to demonstrate for the families in Gaza, in West Bank, is something I never thought I'd live to see in this country. I have a little bit hard time to say it, but I have a friend in Israel, we communicate all the time. And you know, in Israel you have a way of, everything is looking through is a reflection of what happened in Germany 33 to 45. You know, if somebody is a bad guy, we use the Nazi word, you know, for everything. And before I came to Germany, when I was like in my 20s, I developed kind of a interest in what was happening here in this time. You know, it was actually one of the reasons I came here. And now when we speak, we often say, you know, it sounds a little bit ironically said, but I feel I really have a chance to live in a moment of history where one was only imagining how things could be. You know, in Israel, it's really over the top, like this is fascist media for a fascist government. I don't think we should say we're on the way. We're long behind it. But I've been going to the demonstrations here since they started. At the beginning it wasn't allowed, but in November we could go into the streets again. And I have to say media was framing it from beginning on in a ridiculous way, but from the police side, violence was there, but was still, you know, they were like feeling it still. This has changed a lot. And I know also Palestinians activists, the state is really, this is psychological torture. And the violence of the police in the demos has become really, in my eyes, it's criminal. And when the media is speaking about these demos, if you read what the Tagesspiegel is writing, what Welt is writing, or BZ, or whatever this, I don't want to say newspaper name, is, I am afraid, like in the last few demos, I have to say I'm afraid for like physical damage and life. And why I'm saying this is that you mentioned before the media is invaded. You said they were invaded, invaded journalism, and you spoke about the elite. You know, journalism is part of the cultural elite in this society, and their failure, you know, Versagen, you say in German, it's a much harder word, you know, they're fucking it up so horribly, is for me a symbol of what all the German intellectual strata in this country, and I especially speak about the so-called soft left. I've been visiting some occasions with people like intellectuals. They're listening to it as if it's like you read about it in the books. It's happening now, it's happening in Gaza, children are dying, and these demonstrations are on their streets. You know, they're in Prenzlauer Berg. When many of them leave, they don't come to these demos, they act as if they don't exist. And this is why I just want to say, they failed us, and I think everybody who came here is exactly we are the people who have to fight against it. They won't save this society. They won't save the Palestinian society who lives here, who suffers unbelievably now. And I just want to encourage you, if you still didn't do it, although I'm sure many of you already did, come to the demos and show your solidarity, because we have a group of people here in Berlin and in Germany in general, which is suffering under unbelievable state and media repression. We have to act. It won't come from the high strata of the society. They're embedded in this state too much. That's it.
Nadia, we have some more time, so maybe you want to add something that previously.
Okay, I will just really put this idea out there because I keep on like wandering around and tell everybody this is what I think should happen. So perhaps here somebody would like to pick this up. Talking about defamation in the media and misrepresentation, doxing, all these things. A lot of people come to me and they say, I want to sue them. I want to go against them. I want to correct the disinformation that they are spreading. And I say this isn't the right way to do it. What is happening is really beyond the law, and these defamation cases are too complicated, too expensive, and also they aren't the right, in my eyes, the right political response here. What we really need is our own media. What I keep on saying is, please, someone go out there, establish independent media, establish, some. I believe you know Mondoweiss, for example. I check what they write, and I think it's very useful, but it's too much concentrated on the U.S. context. So it's good for their context, but it doesn't serve our context. And I really believe that I think like whatever we do, we should really keep in mind this particular idea. So I just wanted to put it out there because by that we can, I think this is the right way to counter this disinformation and censorship.
So thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. I guess the audience maybe has questions for the panel.
Hi, I'm a journalist from Junge Welt. I don't know if you know this newspaper. It's like a Marxistic daily newspaper. And I'm also a member of Jewish Voice. And Junge Welt tried to report the speech of Abu Sita, for example, who couldn't cross the border. And so I'm asking you, how can we report better? How can we get better sources like in this state? And we are watched by the Secret Service, so-called Verfassungsschutz. We are like anti-Semitic newspaper. What can we do in your opinion?
I have to talk about the Press Project now. I'm a proud member of a small commune of journalists in Greece. We talk to the people. We live out of the people. We started about 12 years ago saying that we need 1,101 people to put €5 each so we can survive. Now we make a lot more like that. We're 7. We started our English edition. But you have, I think you're about 20,000 newspapers. 25, good. So you have the basis. Tell them. They know that they need to give you any kind of support you need. I'm lucky enough, and I can tell that we have the trust of the Greek left. And I'm going to say this as an example so that you can understand why we should speak to the people. They need us and we need them. We are doing what we call excursions, which is when we want to go like when they killed Soleimani, go to Iran, or when when the Beirut port was destroyed, we went to Beirut. We go to the people and say, we want to send a journalist there. We need that kind of money. The ticket is such and such, the hotel. We gather the money in 2 days, 4 days the most. There are times that we gather them in half a day, like for the Assange trial. I was in London to cover that with the money of the people. So what you have is, tell them, trust us, you know us. And they will trust you. Ask for money. Ask them to support you. Now you have a trial, like in 18th of July, right? Okay, tell that to people. I'm going to write about it. It's one of the things that I'm going to write about. They are followed by the Secret Service. They're not journalists, they're extremists, if you don't know that. So, yeah. So, I believe that we're an experiment that can happen everywhere, but it needs the trust. And you have the trust. We started from 0. You already have the trust of 25,000 people. Use it. Tell them. Ask them. They are there to support you and they know that they need you.
Hi, I'm a bit surprised that this name never comes up when we're talking about German media, and it's Holzbrink Publishing Company, which is a media empire in Germany, and it's literally a Nazi family inherited media entity, and I think we need to shame them more to explain that this media should not exist under that control. They inherited their money from this money that was made during the Third Reich. So why are we not writing more about this and informing people about the media oligarchies, which are the gatekeepers of the information? And yes, it's fantastic, as much independent media as we can do, but we don't have that same kind of power that oligarchic media has. They have such a massive reach. But if we can try more in the to the German audience of Tagesspiegel to inform them that they're reading something literally that should, be denazified. It should not exist as it does right now.
May I comment quickly on what you said? I totally agree with you, and there are two things that I already thought of. What can we do against Springer? And so I just want to put these two ideas out here, and maybe someone, fix it up. So I thought, who owns Springer? And where do they get the money from? Because who reads these awful newspaper? Do people really buy it? And actually, they're owned by a Canadian holding. And I was thinking, okay, why not use the tactics of BDS, namely divest, push these holdings to divest from Springer, perhaps. The other thing I was thinking about, Springer owns an Israeli newspaper. I forgot the name. It's some kind of eBay Kleinanzeigen thingy. It's
a company who sells immobilien in the West Bank.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually live off or make money from advertising apartments on stolen land. We all know it's stolen land, but even the UN acknowledges it. Everybody acknowledges, except US and Israel, that it's actually occupied. So we're talking about the West Bank. And it's a crime. It's an international crime under the Rome Statute that regulates the International Criminal Court to make profit on occupied territory. So I'm just putting the idea out there that this is the Springer is benefiting from this kind of transaction on occupied territory. And there's this new law in Germany, the Lieferkettenschutzgesetz, and I believe that there's something to do here, and I just think that it needs more creative minds to really work on this. But it could be a way. I think it mostly hurts when it's about money, so perhaps this is where our action should focus on.
Hi, I have a question about the whole situation of reporting on everything that is happening in Gaza at the moment, and I feel like I can't really rely on any type of media anymore, in this instance especially. So we have completely turned to social media for that purpose, and I would love to get your opinion on social media as the little but very powerful sister of state media, of formerly independent publications and all the other types of media that exists. So I would love to know how do you feel about social media? Do you use it yourself? Do you consume it? Do you get any information from social media? What's your take?
I will answer, and through the answer, I'll answer other questions or remarks that I had in mind. So I work in this network of independent Arab media. And they come from the region. They are Lebanese, Syrian, Egyptian, Jordanian. So I totally agree with you. The Arab states are traitors, but unlike Europe, they don't claim to be standing for a free press and democracy. So they already, without Palestine being related and in concern, they crush their media. So the media is not free and is not really journalists I know journalist friends who are in prison and who are facing persecution and some of them also long sentences because they have unearthed or uncovered stories that are harmful for the interests of the states, the interests of the dictators. For this first question on the journalist from Youngveld, maybe it's helpful also to get inspired and learn about media in the global south, media journalists who have been working under extreme and dire conditions for quite a long time. Now, of course, not all the global south, but I just given a few examples about the ones we work with. And know what are the kind of like tactics and how they continue to actually maneuver certain areas. And recently I got to know, for instance, a very beautiful, I've forgotten the name, Ecuador feminist media outlet run totally by women, who of course also, given the situation in Ecuador, are under pressure and persecution. So yeah, many of us do turn to social media, but unfortunately social media is also owned by some of those gigantic companies that they do have their own interest in how coverage is happening. And I'm sure you have known, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but the shadowing that Palestinian content has been suffering from in these social media accounts. And definitely, I can tell you as a fact, in the organizations I work with, all of a sudden, for instance, they lost many of their followers on Facebook, especially Facebook. That was the first to be hit. And then they have now much less followers on Instagram. So the content is not really pushed up or pumped up. I don't know what's the lingo for this social media. But still, again, because I started speaking about the Gazan journalists, this is where we find them, yeah? We do find many of them on social media and through social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc. And they are, documenting their daily lives there. Others are also relying on. Sometimes we are critical of them, but nonetheless they do the job, especially when it comes to Palestine, like Al Jazeera and other outlets. In order to get our information. And from time to time also groups like Telegram or WhatsApp groups in order to follow journalists on the ground as well.
What I want to say, it's quite banal, but I think it's more important today than ever. The problem with these social media, as mentioned, is that it's under too much control, the algorithm and all this, we all know about that. I think actually we have to take what's really left for us is to try and develop tools for critical reading of mass media. This is for me, the moment you know Twitter is owned by Musk and you find your 3 profiles which you like, it still will always lead you to the same 3 places. The mass media is a huge structure. And another problem is that it takes a lot of time. From my experience, you just find yourself after 1.5 hours in front of the computer. You got some information, but your brain processing is sometimes very, how should I put it? It's not really going deep. Maybe the best we can do now is really looking at this media conglomerate, really from United States to here to Israel, which is really working together on this crime, and try to really analyze out of it. At least this is what I'm trying to do: analyze out of it what is actually behind this society, which lets something like this happen, cheering for it in a sense. This is for me, social media is a double-edged sword. We saw what it did in Arab Spring, but we saw also what is happening with it now 10 years later. So I'm trying to always be careful seeing that as as the enlightened option and the option of freedom, when I contrast it with something else, you have to be also very critical about that. So we live actually in a time where critical thinking is the only thing you have left. It's the only really freedom we still have left. And try, if I may say so, just read longer books who can help us analyze this reality for ourselves. Otherwise, we are thrown for their mercy, you know. Sorry, that's I didn't. You know, it's you find yourself. I mean, there's really clear propaganda if you watch the Israeli television, if you watch the Tagesschau in Germany, or if you watch what do I care, Fox or CNN. Same in green, you say in Germany. But behind it, you can really find out about the structure. If you know, if you really look at them and suffer a little bit, you can learn a lot. And the rest is really up to us.
Can I add just? Okay. Because I had a question from Dimitra about the same thing, and we were discussing it yesterday. How do you choose who to follow? How do you choose who to read? It's not good for journalists, what I'm going to say. It's about the long books. Start from 1850, The Big Game. And then how here in Berlin, in the Berlin Conference, they shared the world. And then see how it went in Latin America, which is like their field where they tested everything. And then if you read that, you will know who to follow. I mean, just the basics on how colonialism was created and what they did. So we can understand what's happening now.
Hi, thank you everyone. I just want to follow up on something that Nadia said in relation to how censorship and also defamation does not operate in abstract terms, but very material terms. And I mean, you spoke about the legal consequences, right? And that this means I want to think a bit more about these material consequences and the fact that it's not just these print ones, right? But it actually follows someone's life, and it may have consequences, of course, material consequences, as it comes also in other domains like being fired from someone's job. As this what you said, that this becomes a fact that actually never disappears entirely. Like also, for example, you know what they said, the Universitäter. That was also a good when they spoke about the. So all of these things, I'm thinking about many times we hear it, and it actually manifests in so many different domains and through so many different kind of like facets. One is the legal, but the other is actually how media defamation and such hate speech actually that's happening on German media at the moment has consequences in so many different levels. And I just want to ask if anyone wants to share experience, because of course this comes up also into other institutions, right? So media institutions is one, but we know cultural institutions, we know so many different institutions that they are not only informed by media, but many times they are actually predominantly informed by media tabloids, I would say. I mean, if someone wants to share or kind of like talk a bit the aspect of how this is entrenched into all these other different institutions, that there is also censorship and self-censorship, and many times is informed by this.
Maybe I can use that to speak about my own branch, which is a very small one, but I think quite representative for the art or culture, whatever you call it, in Germany right now. I think there's a very interesting comparison between what happened with the Russian invasion to Ukraine and Israel-Gaza situation. I work in Berlin opera institutions and other places in Germany, and when the Ukraine war started, all the opera houses were very fast in canceling contracts of Russian artists. Maybe you heard about Anna Netrebko, she's the biggest star. they were concentrating on her. But I know many Russian singers and dancers, by the way, who also come here to dance, who lost any possibility to work in the West. This came directly. It's always the question if it really has to be said by the politics or culture institution just feels it. You know, this is always the biggest question. I mean, this is a dictator in a democratic way. You know, culture in general in a capitalistic society is very conformistic. You know, so it takes very little to make cultural institutions in this country and other countries to do what the government is expecting of them. The comparison with Gaza now is really striking because nobody speaks about it. It just doesn't exist. There's a Kultur senator in Berlin. He's all over the place with every critic on Israel is anti-Semitic. I mean, we're going to watch a film which stood under this incident in the Berlinale. I mean, the guy goes in every television channel and says that a Jewish filmmaker is anti-Semitic, you know. And this is a way politics make very clear to the cultural institutions which are anyway dependent on them financially, because culture, you know, here in this country, the situation is really great. We get a lot of money. It's unbelievably rich. You have so many theaters and opera houses, but you're still dependent on state money. At the end, you don't make profit with it. You know, if you think about it, normal opera house in Germany, like between 3 or 7% of the tickets which are being sold are coming from audience tickets. You know, all the rest comes from state. From tax we are all paying. And they have to go, in that sense, I mean, they probably think they have to go with the direction of the government. And really, concerning Gaza, I didn't have expectations, but absolutely nothing. There was one moment where Chalo, the Kultur senator, he was initiating a law here about, it was the anti-Semitic clause. You know, he was actually, the CDU was initiating a rule that cultural institutions will only give jobs to people who have signed some kind of thing which promised they are not anti-Semitic or something like that. At that moment, really, people in the opera houses in Berlin stood up and said, "No, that's too much." You know, I mean, you know, even those politicians, they have some moments, they do it so blatantly and so obvious that everybody say, you know, I mean, let's keep it down. I mean, we do what you want, but we're not. You don't have to show us as idiots. You know, so that was too much. But in general, there's very little politicians has to do to make artists, cultural institutions to go the way they want them. I have to say, for me, this is like almost the deepest betrayal you can have on art. I mean, I told you this before. I mean, you play Nabucco in the evening, you know, and it's about people getting their freedom. I mean, the whole oeuvre of some of the great composers, for example, literature, whatever, films, freedom is the main theme, one of the main themes of humanity, if not the biggest one. And somehow this society succeeds in living a double life. It's like a double conscious. People feel it, you know. It's not like also, I think when they see it in television, it's not like everybody is completely gefühllos. It's not like they lost their feelings or empathy. I mean, everybody is looking at a body of a child in Gaza and says, that's horrible. But somehow this society succeeded in neutralizing the next cognitive step. This is the step I think everybody here, otherwise I think you wouldn't be here, are able to do, but it's a very small part of society, and I have to say I don't have like a medicine for it. It's quite now. It's very depressing. Art would be a place where this kind of thing could actually start building conscious and like really through feelings and through philosophical ideas and everything. It's a big problem in our society, and I have no solution for it. But just as an example for your question.
I would like to add something to that, the question relating to censorship in the arts and in the cultural sphere, and what you've just mentioned about this clause that Jallo tried, and then artists protested and they withdrew, but it's still on the table. And just this week, the Berlin Senator for Justice suggested that any funding should be connected to the question whether this organization or person is not an enemy to the Constitution. And when she was asked who would be an enemy to the Constitution, she said, well, people who are being observed by the intelligence service, like, for example, Junge Welt. And at the same time, like this week, the Federal Intelligence Service of Germany, Bundesverfassungsschutz, decided to put BDS as, they say Prüffall, like they would watch it. They would watch BDS. And so here you have the connection between, like, it's not so obvious anymore, like sign this clause that you are not an anti-Semite according to the IHRA definition, which is a problematic definition of anti-Semitism. But rather now they come through the other door. And here again, like it's a question of where censorship and media defamation come together, because we have been winning all cases related to BDS, like really, like even there's a case at the European Court for Human Rights from a French organization that was they won that case. We won the case in front of the Bundesverwaltungsgericht. We won the cases on several smaller administrative courts, and all the courts decisions, they say the BDS isn't an anti-Semitic organization. It's like they say it's too heterogeneous to say whether it's anti-Semitic. We believe it's not anti-Semitic, and any restrictions based on BDS is just like unlawful. But there's no reporting about it. I think when you type BDS like on Google, and then you will have like all the German newspaper outlets, it's like anti-Semitic, 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 Jew haters, Israel haters, anti-Semitic. This is the only connection that there is. So it has never been reported that we are winning these cases. So this is why the Senator for Justice can just or the Bundesverfassungsschutzammt can just like casually say we're gonna watch them because they are extremists. And another thing that reminded me when you asked the question about social media and censorship, the immigration authorities, the police, everybody who is trying to hurt people, they go on social media accounts. Before you have an appointment in the immigration authority to renew your residency or to apply for asylum or they check your social media appearance. So I have to tell people, censor yourself before you go there, before you hand in the application, put your account on the privacy and so on. So people are and I don't know, I don't want to say half of the cases, but really a lot of the cases that are on my desk, people are being investigated because they share things on social media, and this is again the double sword, I don't know who put it like that, of social media, police violence. Like we want to report police violence, right? But the police also watches those videos, and then they take certain like material that is censored or people can be identified through these videos. So it's a very tricky situation. I never know what to tell people. Like basically I say, film it and keep it to yourself. But I also understand, of course, if people want to publish it. It's tricky. But so this is another form of censorship.